Could we just walk?
So Meghan, welcome to the Layered Onion podcast. I'm very excited to have you here.
Thank you.
So maybe you could introduce yourself and so people know, but you have a very eclectic, varied background.
Yeah.
So maybe you could just tell us about yourself.
Sure. Currently, I work for a Dean by Local, which is a nonprofit that supports local businesses. And that could be other nonprofits. It could be large organizations. It's just as long as it's locally owned. And I guess I never thought I would begin that world, but it kind of makes sense. Like you said, my history has been very diverse between counseling and clinical pastoral education and, construction work and just a lot of, and coffee roasting. You know, you put that all together, all of them done under small businesses or locally owned businesses. And this is kind of a perfect fit right now. And I really, really am enjoying it. And it's a really important time in the community and in our systems to be trying to support local businesses because it's just a very pivotal, kind of reminds me like, not that I was born, but not that I know what the experience was like, but the 70s, how I feel like the 70s must have felt to people that were trying to revolutionize things and change things and make collectives and cooperatives. And that's where it feels like that to me right now. And so I feel like a really important place to be. I'm really honored that I get to it's wonderful to work with different businesses and hear their stories and defend their stories and go around and talk about their stories.
I just this past week and a half, maybe 2 weeks, we've had 2 restaurants close in the village I live in. And we were at a meeting together and I just was struck by your discussion and passion, frankly, about how tough it is for these local businesses to make it. And I think that's a story that's not really told.
It is not.
So maybe you could, spend a little bit of time on that because I just found myself really engaged.
Yeah. And I think it's not talked about as much, not because no one wants to talk about it. I think it's because, the people that know about or are experiencing it don't have the time or the capacity or even want to admit that this is what they're struggling with. Because in any business, you start in a business, even if you're selecting to exit out of the business or you decide to retire, there's going to be grief and there's going to be this, did I fail? Looking back, did I do everything right? So when you are put in a position where you're forced to make those decisions, it's not something you want to be sharing loudly. And you assume everybody else, just like parenting or anything else, social media, you look at and go, oh, everyone else seems to be doing fine. What's wrong with me? Mm-hmm. So I think part of it is just that threshold of not feeling comfortable talking about it is one. But secondarily, part of owning a local business, specifically restaurants, is not having any time. And at the end of the day, the thing that you need to do most is care for yourself and usually care for your family because most restaurant owners have families. So then going, well, you know what? I should seek some support and I should show up at that village meeting and I should go talk to the economic development board and I should let people know what we're struggling with. It's just not happening. And it's not because they're failing or because they're not doing a good job. It's just the capacity is just not there and vice versa. On the flip side of things, if you're working on developing a new area and you're working on okay, how are we going to make the best thing we can for this community? You're talking to the people that want the best for that community and have the most to spend on that community. And so I think there's a big gap between the 2 different realities. They both exist, but there's just no communication. There's no connection between the 2. So, and I think right now we're seeing a really significant middle class, I don't know how you describe it, just it's imploding, exploding as the systems were breaking down and then COVID hit and pandemic hit and everyone I don't know how we've been making it work this long, whether it's healthcare, whether it's food, everything is kind of crumbling. People are rebuilding. The middle class is the one, and I don't mean middle class, I don't even know how you would define that, but I'm just saying people that had disposable enough income to go to a restaurant, people that own a restaurant, typically you're going to have enough to get by for your family, maybe. Mm-hmm. People can't make that choice right now. They don't have that. Coffee shops are doing amazing. Coffee shops are doing amazing because they're in that one little price bracket that people can still afford. And while they're there, they can also work or they can meet people, but you can't take your whole family out for dinner anymore. Or if you do, then you got to make all these other choices. And I think there's a lot of realities that no one talks about. So many business owners don't pay themselves for years after they open. So people think, oh, you must be a restaurant or you must be wealthy. So many of them are not. So many of them will go 3-4 years without ever giving themselves a salary. That doesn't mean they're not having any profit. It just means it all goes back into the business. And they have not had enough profit to set aside, I'm going to get paid this much a year. That's a really ugly situation. And in Madison, I'm sure other places, but right now in Madison area and the surrounding counties, like we have so much priority on values. Like we're in Madison. We live this kind of lifestyle, right? We value these things. We're going to take care of our employees. We're going to provide a living wage. All these things are super important and a reaction to a broken system. But the flip side of that is business owners, typically a lot of them aren't being able to insure themselves or their family. Like I'm living on principle alone and goodwill. And so that doesn't work anymore. And so it's a long answer to what you said, but there is just this disconnect between the reality and even those of us who just think of, oh, I just went and got my coffee across the street. And there's a lot of staff working. It's going really well. They're always busy. Life's good. There's that disconnect. And
well, I was really struck, and I think it's a great example of what you're talking about between the two, those developing and those actually living in the local world, is that there's all these developments, and in fact, all up and down the corridor we're on, but often they're making their money on the living units above, and the restaurants or the storefronts that are below are really sort of the gravy profit. Those are the break even up above, and these are the gravy profit. So they don't want to bet on local businesses anymore.
Absolutely. And they're really renting, when they set that rent threshold, it's above what a local business can afford for almost. Sometimes I'm really surprised every once in a while when I see one, and I kind of want to just go in and say, what rate did you negotiate? Or what are you giving up to be at this location? Because most of our locally owned businesses, it's between $25 a square foot is what a lot of them, like Verona, for example, if you wanted one of their new developments, have retail space, $25 a square foot. When you add that up, that's huge. Whereas, some people are paying 10, right? So it's and it's just down the street from each other. So it is a really good point. And I think that there's a couple ways to, like, if you were the developer, you would probably say like, oh no, that's not accurate. That's not my gravy. I have it factored in and I have to fill this space, but I gave myself 3 years to fill it. So it is, how each person defines it that's where people be like, no, that's not the truth. But when you're on the bottom end of that, and I don't mean the bottom of like economy, but you're the person that wants to get in that space and you can't reach the developer and you can't reach you just have to work with that first level up above you. That's not, you don't understand that. And they're not sharing that. And it's going to keep happening until all these are empty.
Well, and that is something, an organization deigned by local, and the idea that we have deigned by local arts, and we have all these different efforts really about trying to revive and have a local business community, but yet it seems like development is working against it. What, from a policy perspective, are some opportunities for Dame by Local or others to influence kind of the process?
Well, and that's hard because we are such a nonprofit-driven community. So Dane Arts is part of the county, but it's most of these organizations that are doing the communicating on behalf of the small businesses are nonprofits, which doesn't allow them to be in a political advocacy role. So there can't be influencing. I can't go to, a senator and say, I've got 10 new businesses who are going to fight this, or we want to sign up. We can't do that, or we would lose our insurance. We would lose our status. So for us, it's about educating folks on what is the best for them. And for us, it's first we have to step into all those spaces and not as an adversary or as an advocate or an influencer, but to go into the Economic Development Board meetings and just listen and then just give information. be just the connector and the communicator. That's our main purpose. But the hard part is getting the businesses to tell us what information needs to go in, and for them to be able to receive us and go, who are you? Why should I listen to you? So I can't really speak to policy because I legally can't. It's just not something I can do. But I do really encourage people to start at it's so overwhelming, but start at the most basic space you're in. If you have a restaurant, who is the district representative? Do that research. Most people like, my what? Because you're like, if I live in the city, I know who the mayor is. But start with who's your district representative, or go to a neighborhood association meeting, and you'll get the vibe of your neighborhood and who's representing you. And then who surrounds that? And then who can you reach out to? So what resources, coming to Dan Buy Local, if you're a business owner, is a really great resource, because we can go directly to them. We can't affect policy, but we can be the person that runs up, asks the question, runs back, kind of like middle school dating or something, right? Like passing letters. Because the fact is, the business owners are back to the same question, they're too busy. It's not built into a business plan to allow for you to understand politics and show up at economic development board meetings and to do all this stuff. It's just not. And when you're struggling, it's even lower on your priority level, even if it's the one thing that might save you. So really rely on resources in the community that exist, the connectors. And so Noah, who we've been talking about, he works for REAP Food Group. He also works for Dane County Food Collective. Dane County Food Collective is an amazing resource for that specifically. Just to contact them. And we always say, just throw stuff at us and we will see what we can get out. And because even if we can't advocate, or even if we don't know, there is somebody in the network of our world that does know. And I think that people need to start, like I said, a collective thinking, that collaborative thinking. You cannot do it alone.
Well, it makes me think of, and I know you can't talk necessarily policy, but you think of all the TIFs and these, are supporting so much of the development. So the city or village or whoever is foregoing tax base, but they have some leverage to say, well, we'd like to see some percentage or element. They do it often with what I would consider equitable housing, but also to think about the businesses would be nice as a part of that process as well.
Very, very much so. Yeah. And, I went to a presentation not too long ago by one of these developers, and hearing them say straight on the front end of their talk was, we are not classified as a, what's the word I'm looking for? Multi-use, like a multi-economic space. Like that's not what it's not affordable housing. And so if you start with, this is not affordable housing, there's one set of expectations. But if you apply for affordable housing, that's where some of the things, if you as a developer, you're going to develop affordable housing, there needs to be much more advocacy and structure involved in that piece. And then if that could then be, obviously it's going to scale down as you get into luxury apartments. They don't need to have the same things that affordable housing does. But we're talking about just basic human rights, being involved in the decision-making process versus politics and money. And it's really, really hard. And then when it goes back, you're going to the next step. Who has the property? Who gets to win that contract in the city that they're developing? And who's fighting for that? What's going to get the city the most? Being able to have that impact at an economic development level when they're deciding, who are we going to give this contract to? How much of this is going to be affordable housing? How much of this is going to be jobs? And if we add this many jobs to a community, how are these many employees going to get here? Can these employees afford to live in our town? Right now, any city in Madison as well can't afford most of the employees that they're building these spaces for. So all of these lower units, these mixed use, it's a great idea, but you're filling it with, well, we're going to have some elderly care, we're going to have some grocery stores, we're going to have some coffee shops and restaurants. That's all of what we have as like less valued employees in this world. I don't think they're less valued, but financially they're not as highly valued, and they can't afford the apartments, so they have to ride the bus. Buses aren't getting to some of these cities, so
it's a vicious cycle.
And like what I was trying to say in the meeting we were at too is there aren't any bad guys. I think there are bad actors at times. So when a small business takes on that victimized role, like the city did it to me, the developers are doing this to us, I think it cuts off that potential for those communication chains to happen. Because once you have a bad guy, you have something you can either fight or run away from, fight or flight. And neither of them are effective communication tools. So when you're not approaching it as this person's got to be a bad guy, the world of developers are all bad. It's just not true, but it makes it easy to walk away from something, and then you stop looking for resources like people that can do the communicating for you, or can do the connecting for you, and empower you to affect change and affect policy. And sometimes it's just having your words recorded. Some of the most effective conversations I have had is to an economic development board in a city, and just saying, this is one of the businesses you're most proud of. That person has not paid themselves in 4 years, and they're on Badger Care. I use that story a lot because it's so vividly true, and they're just like, that can't be true. There's just such a disconnect. You need somebody to go in there, and then they go like, oh, well, how many of our businesses are in that position? If no one ever asks them the question, they're not going to typically look for the answer unless they're coming from the experience of advocacy.
Well, and many of them have not run their own small business, so they just don't understand some of the barriers that exist.
Yeah.
And how many hats a particular person has to wear.
Yeah.
That aren't maybe the major reason they went into business. So
we always say about Dane by Local, like you go into business because you're passionate about something.
Right. Or
you're like, hey, I could make some money at this. Neither of them mean you're good at the 50 plus skill sets it takes to run a business.
Right.
And, lots of times what we see too locally is business will grow, and people are like super excited, like, oh, they have all these employees, their product is going national and it's super exciting. But usually when that business is at that peak, if you talk to them, they're like, I just really would rather be back down here again. Because you have to go over this hump of, I can't do it. I got to hire people. Oh, we're here. And by then you're like, oh, now I miss making that handmade pasta. And nobody knows, I don't get to see anybody eat it anymore. And so there's like this interesting threshold, and some of those continue to go on and some stay. That's kind of an interesting progress to watch. And those are the ones you see and hear about. You don't hear the detail, but like someone's like, oh, why did XYZ business make it? And they're being recognized. How come the newspaper always posts about them and not me? It's hard stuff. As a small business owner, it's hard stuff to process and understand.
So if you had to pick a couple stories that you think epitomizes the moment we're in right now for, sort of small business, whether it be a restaurant or even just, another small business that's doing more of a service-oriented work, what would be some of those stories that you think really just talk about this moment that we need to solve?
Yeah, and I talked about, currently in this situation that goes to my mind that I want to talk about, that I was talking about at that meeting as well, is we have 5 like businesses. So they're producing a very similar product. And the great thing about a lot of Madison businesses is they have this mentality already, which is what we push at Dane by Local, is collaborate, not compete. Because as soon as you compete, then there's a bad guy, and then it starts to become toxic, and then you tear it apart, and then, there goes a chain restaurant. So right now there's 5 of these businesses locally that we're talking with. They all produce almost the same exact product, but slightly different. In the one company, they have a really, really good marketing person, and that's why their product is successful, but they can't pay for the equipment being used to make that product anymore. And if they don't get it paid by the end of the year, they may have to file for bankruptcy. Over here, they're having a really successful social situation, like people are coming, people are going, their location's great, but the owners are like, done. We burned ourselves out trying to build up this, which everyone else wants. And over here, we're like, yeah, we've got the, policy down, we've got the handbook down, we've got payroll down, and we've got distribution down, but, we don't have any passion, right? So each one of these businesses is on the brink of either stepping away and either selling their business. One is interested in selling or moving out, and the other 4 are at the brink of like, I'm going to have to shut down or file for bankruptcy. And what we're looking at right now is the potential of a shared services co-op, so that each one of them can bring a skill set to the table. And that way, so the Metro bus just drove by. I'm just trying to think of an example because I can't use the actual industry. So logistics. So rather than the person that's driving the bus also having to, at the end of their shift, do marketing and restocking shelves or whatever it is, like rather than this one business running themselves dry financially or emotionally or whatever, like spreading that workload out and saving money and working towards the benefit of the whole community. Because if these 5 businesses stay together, our community will be stronger because they do provide jobs, they provide, a lot of value. And I think that's one last thing about that part of it is people should look at the research. We do it. Lots of people do it. DMA Local does. But the research on the return on a dollar, we will preach that forever and ever and ever. A chain dollar is like about a third of that dollar comes back to the community, whereas 3 times that dollar comes back to the community. And it's way more when it's a restaurant. Like 60.7% of the profits from a business go back into the community, whereas only about 30% stay when it's a chain. And that's because they want to give back to their community. Their staff are local, but then they're like, well, we want to give back. So the nonprofits go up, the giving goes up. So holding place for those local businesses is so important. But as a community, they're holding that space for us and making us feel like we're in a space together, but we're not, the community as a whole is not doing the same back for them. We're not putting the structure and the systems in place and communicating about it. Ultimately, that's it, is just talking about it so that is a strong enough community till we can support them.
But you kind of hit at sort of the crux of the problem too, is people who maybe used to be able to support can't support in the same way anymore.
Yes.
And so, like you said, they might have gone out to eat once a week, and they just can't do that with a family of 4 anymore, or they want to, whatever it might be. It just has made it more difficult. And I don't know, have you had many ideas with people that you've talked to or worked with that maybe could bridge that gap?
I'm not sure I understand. Bridge what gap? Or
the kind of that moment where, here's an example. Food trucks. In some ways, food trucks don't have the issue of rent and all of those things. But if they're parked in a place that's nice, a family could still have a meal and have community, et cetera. But you kind of lack that community of a restaurant. So I'm trying to think, are there other things that can be done?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that we've been encouraging the Dean by Local businesses to do is if you pick almost 3 unrelated things, like logistics, just like now I see a U-Haul truck outside the window. That's not a good example, but and join together and host one event rather than a brewery and a fishing store and a bookstore all holding one event on the same night and making people have to choose where they're going to spend their money. Have one joint event, you each invest so much less. And if it doesn't turn out for you, no one's out anything. And the fish people now know about this bookstore. I didn't even know you had these books. The bookstore now there's definitely crossover between people that love to have a local brew and right. So there's this crossover that starts to happen, and that builds that community because you start showing up in spaces and you feel like I could afford to do this. And I met a whole bunch of new people and I felt like I was part of something rather than showing up, trying to get to one event and there's 5 people there and they're the same 5 people you might see every time you go to these events. Start spreading around some of that. And we are seeing a lot of success with that, even at our level, like chambers, nonprofits, we're all doing the same thing because none of us can afford right now. The donations are not there. The funding isn't there. So if 4 of us as an organization get together, that means our members get to meet 3 other chambers members. And it's not the same network pool every time. So then they get to spread their community more. So it's just right now, it's the only bridge that I can see that really works well. People used to be like, let's have a fun party in the park and we'll have free music and we'll hand out ice cream. Well, the ice cream stores can't afford to hand out free ice cream very much anymore. And the free music, like that's all, we can't give anybody free anything anymore because we need to value every person.
Right.
Internships, that shouldn't be free anymore. So, they're all very, very valuable evolutions. But it means that the climate and the systems have to change all the way down. So just finding those new ways that still show high value of people's rights and needs is, I guess, ultimately, and it's going to have to happen through collaboration and communication, just groups of people working together.
Yeah. I think your comment earlier, collaboration, not competition, is really the key. And I do really see that in this community. Yeah. Since working with Dane County Food Collective, I just cannot get over how collaborative everybody is. It's been really awesome to see.
It's beautiful. It's a lovely, because there really is enough people to eat the same food, right? To eat the food or drink coffee. And if you're supporting each other through the harder times, the idea, the potential of making it through it is going to be much better. Yeah. I don't know. It's really hard for people to let go of. And it's really hard for us to have to talk business owners and be like, it's okay. You don't need to compete. You know, like we have a bike shop owner in Madison, and there was a new bike shop owner opening maybe 2 blocks from him. And I was like, well, how do you feel about that? And have you met him? He's like, oh yeah, he's the old owner, right? The existing owner sat down with me and gave me all this is what works best. This is what doesn't work. This is what I sell. Maybe you could sell similar things. And like, there is enough people riding bikes that both of us can survive as long as we're not wasting money and resources trying to compete against each other. Well, I'm going to have a better set of whatever than I'm going to offer. And to me, that's amazing. And they collaborate. Like, we have 4 different bike shops or 3 different bike shops in town that all collaborate on rides, you know, and they're like, I don't care. Your bike ride people came along on my bike ride.
Right.
It's about riding bikes and encouraging the community, and they need bike mechanics. There's just a shortage of bike mechanics coming up. So the more people that are biking, the more have an interest in fixing bikes. All kind of feeds itself.
So I think as we think about Dane Buy Local and your role within the, county and the community, what do you think are some of the pieces that are the most important for you all to help these small businesses?
Listening. Yeah, 100% above everything else is listening and receiving the information. And oftentimes it's just giving it back with options. Typically we meet with somebody and it takes at least an hour. And what are you struggling with? What do you wish you could do? What do you wish you had? What's struggling? Just all those things. And then you can put together a list of, here's all the resources locally. Here's the people that will do it, trade the resources for you. Here's those that will charge you a lot, but you're going to get this. Here's one you want to avoid the monthly fee for, but they're really great to work with. And sometimes that's enough to give people, like, just to have them in their hands is enough to, like, okay, I'm not alone. That's the part of that listening, is just we say this over and over, you're not alone. You are not alone. Every business owner that we work with starts out with that thought process is, no one has any idea what this is like. And it's true because it's unique to your business and how you built your business. But what's not unique is that everyone feels alone.
Yeah.
That's part of mental health. That's part of marriage. That's part of parenting. That's part of most things in life. As soon as you start thinking I'm all alone, it's kind of like competing. You start thinking you're alone, and that kind of toxicity starts, and you lose hope really quickly. And I think that other than listening, then speaking. Like I will talk to anybody, anytime about whatever needs to be talked about, because if there's a story to tell, I'm happy to tell it, because our businesses don't have the capacity to do it for themselves mostly. And they need people just willing to walk around and be like, hey, did you know you can get amazing stuff just down the road? Or, yeah, there is somebody that does that locally. And, we do a lot of workforce development, and it's amazing that same kind of that thought process if you meet with teenagers in high school, and it's like, well, I think I want to be a nurse. Like, oh, really? You want to be a nurse? Yeah. Well, what kind of nurse do you want to be? Oh, I don't know. Do you want to do that? No. Do you want to do that? No. And then, like, well, actually what I really wanted to do was I wanted to help animals when they're coming out of an injury. It comes really, really specific, but we're so used to, like, generalizing. And, like, but no one's going to possibly be interested in the thing I'm interested. Oh no, there's 3 people doing that, and one of them rides to people's homes on a bike to do that work. And they would shadow you, or, like, have you shadow them and teach you. But that's, our minds just naturally work that way. We go from, like, well, this is my thing, and nobody could possibly understand. And it's like, oh, wait, there's all this is happening. So I feel like that's our job, is to scale out and bring it back in, and scale out and bring it back in, and, just keep perspective, but spread that knowledge that there are no bad guys. Hope is a big part of it. Lacey from Rude Brew Kombucha said to me one day, she's like, you're like relentless. I don't know how she said it, but like, you're just constantly full of hope. Do you ever get tired? And I'm like, it's not that I have hope. It's that I hear everybody's hopes, and I'm just like, yeah, man, that's so exciting. There's a lot of hard stuff, but
yeah. So, well, I really appreciate you coming, but let me ask you, do you have any parting thoughts that you want to kind of share?
Another, really quickly though, when you said specific stories, like going to that development meeting, talking to one of their executives and seeing how close-minded that person was about the potential of solar, or the potential of having someone on site to do like support for the people that will be living there. The closed-mindedness is not, again, it's not a bad guy thing. It's a lack of education and the amount of time and energy it will take for them to learn it. And so us, people like organizations like ours or REAP, or there's so many, even chambers, depending on which city you're in, gathering that information for the developer and going, here's everything that's happening locally around solar. Here's an example of what it's like to have a peer support specialist live in your apartment complex. Here's an example, right? Like a community action coalition is another really great resource. So knowing that those exist and just tapping into them, it's energizing to get that executive to finally go, yes, I'm ready. I'll sit down with you and I will listen. But there's not a single like local solar installer who's going to have the time and to keep hounding this executive, but we do. So I guess just that there's no bad guys, and just communicate, and just keep throwing your, like I always talk about like fishing, like just keep throwing your reel out there, throwing the bait out, and to the right people. And you don't have to do the work yourself. It's being done. There's so much redundancy too.
Well, that's what always amazes me, is the redundancy.
So much of it.
Yeah, that for sure.
Yeah,
so
fill out the community action coalition's needs assessment. I brought that up at the meeting too, but we underestimate how many of our major programs in our county and in our state were hatched or born out of the community action coalitions. Head Start, Planned Parenthood, these are organizations that were just an idea, a response to a needs assessment, and they grow, and every 3 years they redo this needs assessment. So we're in a space again where, what are our needs? Talk to them, fill out that form, and so people know where the needs are, and then the community can react and start building programs to fix these areas, strengthen them.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate you coming.